Hello and welcome to Ask Lovecraft After Dark. I'm so excited to have back on the show Silvia Moreno Garcia. Silvia, welcome. Sylvia is a writer, an editor, a journalist. She's done a lot of work in the world of weird fiction, and she's been on this show previously. She came on back in 2018 when the show was just kind of getting started. But we've known each other for a while. We were representing the Canadian contingency, Necronomicon, a handful of times, along with David Nickel and a handful of other folks. But yeah, a lot has gone down since we last spoke. How are you doing, Sylvia?
I'm very good. Thank you. Nice to see you too. I think you are now ex-Canadian.
It's true. I ran away. I returned to America, but we still we I was say we go back every year. We haven't gone back because of various health conditions and whatnot. But we're looking forward to being able to come back. I imagine you're happy not to have your corner of Canada like on fire currently.
Yeah, no, yeah. British Columbia is doing okay here, I think. So fingers crossed, no major fires this year during the summer. It looks really weird and apocalyptic when the sky is all red when you wake up. So yeah.
One of the first things I encountered with Sylvia was tales of Canadian post-apocalypse. Given everything that's gone on over the last few years, does that feel like we need Fractured 2? Like, is that going to be coming out?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good thing. I should tell the publisher to give it another push. Yeah, no, it was interesting because I think back when we did Fractured, one of the things that I had to ask was that people not send me a lot of zombie stories, and there was like maybe one zombie story, that kind of thing, that we ended up buying, and the rest were other kinds of apocalypse. And definitely medical apocalypse, I think, was not a scenario that a lot of writers conjured when they sent the stories, although we had a couple of things where there was maybe a disease going on. It was just not something that I think people would put on their radar, and now it is. Like, medical apocalypse is now definitely, I think, a theme and a thing that you're seeing pop up in literature. So it's just funny how back then I was just like, no zombies please, and very few stories about kind of disease spreading, and now it's like, oh yeah, it changed.
It has been a couple of years, and I guess I'm curious how you have seen things change. I mean, I know obviously you've gone through a massive explosion of popularity. Mexican Gothic hit New York Times bestseller and absolutely exploded. And you've had a lot of other titles since then. I mean, I think since last year on the show, you've had Gods of Jade and Shadow, Untamed Shore, Mexican Gothic, and Velvet Was the Night. Are those sort of like the big four that we've seen since then?
Yeah.
So personally things have changed, but as far as like you're someone who keeps track of trends and how publishing is changing, what have been some major shifts you've seen in the last couple of years? Has it been the same trends, only more so?
No, there have been some major shifts in the industry. I mean, one of the big problems that happened were dates being pushed and things being moved into kind of another year. So that created a bit of a trickle down effect that we're still feeling, and things are still being pushed. I'm still seeing people that are having their dates moved and pushed. So that kind of was a bit of a tremor in the ecology. In terms of things that are hot or not, well, horror, scary things. Horror was one thing that in the last few years has really picked up in major imprints. We had Tor Nightfire, which just came out on the market last year, the first major horror imprint to emerge since the 1990s and the collapse of the Abyss Dell line. And that's a significant step. But we're also seeing horror being bought by other different publishers, and horror kind of getting a bit of a better name. It was definitely a genre that you couldn't say anything even slightly related to horror and you would be booed out of a room by agents and editors. And that's not the case anymore. It's got a lot of sales power. Oh, Mexican Gothic was really successful. I'm seeing a lot of Mexican Gothic comps. Gothic, being perceived now as, yes, it's back in after being also a genre that nobody wanted to touch. Suddenly people want to touch it. There's, I think young adult is kind of not gone down, but stabilized in a way. For a while, we had kind of this flight of adult authors going into young adult because that's where the money was. And now I'm seeing some young adults shifting into adult genres, which has also been sort of interesting. Fantasy, I think, has been doing pretty well for quite a while. And sci-fi is still sort of the poor cousin of genre. And horror used to be the poorest cousin of all, but like I said, its fortunes are a bit on the upswing right now. Otherwise, we continue to see kind of the collapse and compression of the mid-list. It's very difficult to make a living as a mid-list writer nowadays. Advances are definitely geared towards new authors that are unproven and without a track record, because if it's unproven, then you might get a big hit. That's one of the mentalities of the industry. So that's not very good for any mid-list writer. And we continue to see we might go from the big five to the big four in terms of companies, like Penguin Random House absorbing another big company, and we end up with 4 mega companies, which brings about questions of industry. Is this really a good thing? Probably not so much. Electronic books have kind of stabilized. There was a point in the early, a decade ago, in which we all thought that everything would be electronic books, and that didn't happen. But audio has really taken off for the past few years, and it's a big market right now, and I think will continue to be a big market for the future. So that's more or less what I'm seeing, and there might be some more particulars, but definitely a good time for horror, I guess, would be what this audience might want to hear.
Now I know the sort of the indie scene is its own weird thing that kind of ebbs and flows, but I think probably the biggest independent news would be the Sanderson Kickstarter. Is that looking like just this complete fluke, or are people looking at that model and going, oh, hello, we can do something with this?
I mean, people have been doing and running Kickstarters for many years. I've run Kickstarters, and other people have run Kickstarters to do a number of Lovecraftian anthologies. I know I contribute to more than one thing that was called Cthulhu something that was financed by fans. The scale of it is what is different in this case. And it's not unexpected. Any writer with a large audience like Sanderson has can probably command a lot of cash right now via that kind of method. For example, I mean, if Stephen King said he's putting out a novel tomorrow via Kickstarter, everybody would buy it, probably me included. Whereas if some kind of obscure writer, more mid-list writer said that, they might get, a few fans, but it would not be the same volume. It kind of changes things a little bit, but also not. I think it just offers a proof of concept for other people that are kind of large, important writers, that they might be able to have more of a direct sales channels for certain products. But I mean, Sanderson was built through legacy media. He wouldn't be that big if he hadn't had the might of all these, big companies behind him. And it's definitely not replicable for the average mid-list writer that, like I said, is already struggling. But it might be necessary for certain mid-list writers to explore this with more care in the future, as possibilities with large publishers continue to collapse, and you've got less advances or publishers not wanting to sign you up. It may just be that a lot more people have to go independent in the near future. The Sandersons of the world, they'll be fine. I mean, they're getting money one way or the other. And I think this just proves that direct sales channels can be a really good source of income for certain writers that have that built-in audience.
How have sort of, magazines and smaller anthologies and things like that, how have they kind of fared throughout all of this? Or is sort of the short fiction world thriving at the moment, or is it also kind of on the edge of the knife?
I mean, I think for speculative fiction specifically, there's this whole ecosystem of small scenes, signs, and magazines that has continued to exist for quite a while and will probably continue to exist in the future. It's a lot easier nowadays to have a magazine and to maintain it than it would have been 25 years ago when you had to physically run copies. So that will continue to happen. The big players that exist are the big players that have been around for a while. It's not surprising when you see that nominees are like Lightspeed or those sorts of magazines. But definitely, if you look at what your average Hugo ballot or Nebula ballot would have been in 2006 when I started versus now, it's very different. You're not seeing, Asimov's and fantasy and science fiction and those kinds of magazines so much anymore. You are seeing a lot of these established online venues that will continue to exist, and some close down, some open up. It's just this, I think it's this kind of side economy that continues to exist. I mean, my concern for me always for that is that a lot of these venues, they do rely on donations, on, kind of people who support the, I guess, the aims of the publication, and sometimes not so much by readers. I support a lot of things and don't read them, right? And so I kind of wonder sometimes if that's the case with a lot of media, if it really does, if it's robust enough to survive any kind of big changes, and I'm not sure about that in going into the future.
If folks who do not follow Silvia on Twitter should, Silvia does a fantastic job of kind of, taking the temperature and explaining very, very succinctly, very bluntly, kind of the state of economics. And one thing I really appreciate is you harken back to the history, right? I mean, you point to the fact that, there was, people sort of look back, oh, the golden age of pulps, the golden age when, folks could, be taken out for caviar and wined and dined by the publishing companies and whatnot. And you like to remind people about, Lovecraft, eating the can of beans and having to turn off the heat and stuff like that. That it's been a historical challenge for the majority of folks in this field.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we had the division between the pulps and the slicks, right? So you wanted to be in the slicks, but which were the fancy magazines that paid a lot better, but you couldn't always do that. So sometimes you were stuck in the pulps. And like you say, Lovecraft, and yeah, Lovecraft couldn't earn a living like that. He did a lot of revision work and ghost writing in order to make ends meet, even though he was quite prolific. And he was not the only case throughout time. Even major writers like Scott Fitzgerald and other writers, they went to work in Hollywood as screenwriters when there was money to be made in the kind of golden era of Hollywood, because that's where the bacon was, right? You could get paid a lot more as a screenwriter than as a novelist at a certain point in time. And then you get through other time periods, even in the 70s, when Robert Silverberg is just churning out all these pornographic novels in order to pay his mortgage, and while he's also doing what we might call, more serious science fiction, but he's doing that. So there's always been this like two types of writers, the kind of like high literature and low literature, and writers that make a lot of income, and writers that make very low incomes. One of the problems is that nowadays a lot of avenues of income have closed down or been reduced. So a lot of things that writers might have done before, like journalism, in order to make a buck, no longer pay like they did. I remember in the 90s, I did some stuff for film magazines, and it paid. They paid you to go watch a movie and you got a check. And nowadays you don't get that. And staff at newspapers has been cut. So, the cultural pages are cut. Then you don't have space to publish. So it's just been all these avenues of work that keep kind of collapsing and getting smaller and smaller of the traditional avenues. And so that's why you have writers going and doing things like Patreon as a source of income, where before you might have done something else. I don't know, you might have sold a few short stories to Playboy magazine, which paid well enough at a certain point in time. But now Playboy magazine is no longer a thing, and nobody even looks at nudes in print form anymore. They don't have any value. Even pornography has changed. You used to pay for the magazine or for the video, and nowadays what you have is people working on webcams, and you tip them, and that's how they're making a living, instead of that old kind of way of doing things. So everything has kind of changed and been altered by technology. And not surprisingly, writing has been one of those fields, the arts, that has been seriously impacted, and both directly and indirectly when magazine closed and there's no money, but also indirectly because when you have publishing houses reducing staff, for example, and you have less editors having to do more things, less assistant editors, copy editors, or outsource that kind of stuff. There's less support for the writer built into the system. And you have editors doing things like saying, we need print ready manuscripts, or we don't want to buy it. So before you might have done a lot more work with an editor, and now they want it just basically just ready to go to print because they don't have time, they don't have the resources to do anything. And that just means you as a writer are having to pick up, or your agent is having to pick up that function more and more. It makes it more difficult to go on and make a living because, for example, maybe I wouldn't have had to polish for 2 or 3 months, and now I have to account for that before I even start, kind of sending out a manuscript. So it's just part of the thing. So it has become more difficult, but it has always been this profession of contrasts, like anything in the arts, where a lot of people can make, a few people can make a lot of money, and a lot of people don't make a lot of money. It just used to be that we had more of a middle class of writers that has now been eroded, right? You could count on being a mid-lister and making a certain amount of income, and you just cannot count on that anymore.
Can you talk about how Mexican Gothic blew up and like what you attribute that to and sort of how that's kind of changed your either relationship to writing and to publishing and so on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of factors, just like everything. I mean, one very easy factor that I can pinpoint is that my date was not moved. So everybody was having their date moved left, right, and center because every other writer was panicking. And my publishing house, either because I don't know what it was, but they just didn't move my date. They were like, yeah, you're going out on that date. And I was like, oh my God, nobody's going to buy it. But, I think moving some dates helped me from the competition. That was good. Another thing was that, it had a really good cover design. I thought it had a pithy title that was easy to remember. Sometimes people get very creative with titles, and why not? So this was easy to remember. It had an easy concept that you could quickly tell people what it was about. It was a genre that had not been tapped in a long time. So there was some hunger for it. And although I had no major breakout success, I had a certain number of books before, so that I knew enough people in the industry and had enough connections to kind of like ask for, hey, can you blurb me? Or hey, can you do a book review? That sort of stuff. So yeah, it was just a bunch of different factors, and that's normally what you're looking at when I say that mid-list writers need to be grown. Is just that you need time to make things happen, and sometimes the first thing doesn't work, not the second thing, and then you get lucky with maybe it's just the right time for something. So when you get a writer where they just get one chance and that's it, and then you're kicked to the curb, that's part of the problem, is that you'll never know if they could have maybe done something else. But yeah, it was just this big mix of things, and I think I was lucky that in a way horror has just been doing a lot better these past few years, and I was able to insert myself in this really nice space that other people were already kind of inhabiting. There was a time when the only person you would find would be Stephen King. Like, I sort of got it. I went to bookstores and it was King and Kuntz, like King and Kuntz. It was all the case only. I would be like, oh my God. And like a Lovecraft volume in a corner. And if you go now, like the last time I went to the bookstore, there was a real like horror section. It wasn't very big, but it was more than King and Kuntz. And it's people like Paul Tremblay, like Stephen Graham Jones, other folks like that. And folks that have been doing a lot of the indie stuff that have kept horror kind of alive and churning in these spaces, that have allowed it to sort of have this revival. So I'm lucky that it happened now, because 15 years ago, it probably would just not have been possible. It's an ecosystem, right? We all kind of are interconnected to each other, and the success of other people allows my success, and my success allows the success of other new books, hopefully in the future.
one thing that always the horrifies and intrigues me is your encounters with people reviewing. Usually, it seems like on Goodreads, where they attempt to like explain how you got the culture and history wrong. And like, is that a specific thing to Goodreads, or is that just like audiences everywhere?
I mean, I get weird messages sometimes from people. It's not like necessarily that I'm like trolling Goodreads and I see something. Sometimes I do see something, or my friends see something, they screen cap it and then they like sadistically send it to me. Look at what this person said about your book. But sometimes it's just like, like fan letters or weird things that happen. Uh, and yeah, I don't know. I guess it's that a lot of my books are set in Mexico and people have a narrow and sometimes incorrect understanding of Mexico. So they come and they tell me some things that are quite baffling to me about the Mexican experience. Everyone's a critic now more than always, even if you have had no training and no idea what you're talking about. But I mean, it's not so bad most of the time. And when friends send me screen caps, it's kind of it's funny. Yeah, like I laugh and I might pass it around, but it's not really for the most part rage inducing. I think there's two things that bug me about Goodreads. One is that there are some people who one star certain books in like a methodical way. Like there's one account, I think it's called Adam, that one stars all gay and lesbian and bisexual or queer books. Like he just gives one star in an attempt to sort of downgrade the vote of that title. So I think that's one bad thing, is when people kind of have learned to weaponize this review system in order to hurt certain kinds of people, minorities or queer people or any other kind of people. It's not good when that happens. And the second thing is that it's very hard to get any kind of error corrected in Goodreads. Even when it's a factual error, I've had situations in which maybe I was like, hey guys, this is actually not like a romance novel. Could somebody remove it from the romance novel list? Because it's, a horrifying story about a mother eating her baby or something like that. And there's no way to do it because it's run by fans. So they tell you, oh, go ask a librarian. And I'm like, I don't know any librarian. I don't know what to do. So it's very hard to get certain things like up the ticket system. And when you deal, like I said, with this type of vandalism or things like that, like I've seen some really awful racist, for example, reviews on Goodreads, and there's no way sometimes to flag them and to get anybody to give you any kind of assistance there. So yeah, one problem is people just being kind of malicious and weaponizing this really important algorithm system. Whether you like it or not, Goodreads is crucial for any writer nowadays. And the second part is that there's no human being for you to talk to. Like there's no ticket that you can almost issue and get somebody to talk to. Even I can't, when I say to the publicist, oh my God, this person just left a racist comment, about my book right there. Can you remove it? Even I would have trouble getting anybody to deal with that. And so, yeah, that lack of some controls and whatever. And I think just a desire for some people to be vandals is quite horrifying. But when people say weird funny things about me and my friends share it, or I come across it, for the most part I try to laugh it off. I think I find Instagram more psychologically damaging because I just started on Instagram and I actually really like it because it's very pretty pictures. But sometimes what happens is I've discovered that you will be tagged in this beautiful picture and it looks gorgeous, so I click on it because I'm tagged and I'm like, oh, I want to see the picture and who wrote it. And then it's like this gorgeous picture, but it says this is a piece of shit. And I'm like, no.
Oh no.
and so I kind of wish that that people wouldn't tag me on Instagram if they don't like it, because it's very hard to tell. Like it's easier to tell on Goodreads because you can see the star rating. So if there was like a star rating attached to it, maybe I would just block it, but I don't know what it is. It's just this beautiful picture. So now I'm afraid of clicking on things,
Oh no.
right? I'm like, I know, is this beautiful picture going to tell me that I suck? Or is it just going to be a beautiful picture? And so I just, in general, I please people, if you're going to say something mean, don't tag me. Um,
The
I can't
different
tell from the picture.
the different social media ecosystems are very strange. Like I've been
Yeah.
on TikTok now for a year,
Oh,
and like
yeah.
one of the first things I liked on TikTok was that there's a very big book talk community and just people reviewing books and talking about books. And for the most part, it's been pretty positive. But I have to imagine like any place on the internet, there are the dank dark sub basements.
Yeah, and you can avoid them, and like I can, like I said, I can go to Goodreads and simply not look at the 1-star reviews. And but it's hard. On Instagram, I haven't found a way to stop people from tagging me. I could disable tagging function completely, but that would affect everybody. So,
Sure.
I'm just like, I don't know what to do. And also, um, yeah, I mean, Twitter has, I think now a few better controls, but there was a time period in which it was pretty hard being out there sometimes. You would say you like pizza, and then somebody would get really angry at you. What about people who cannot eat cheese, huh, Sylvia? You cheese Nazi. So
um One thing that's been exciting to also see is you become a regular over at Washington Post. How did that happen?
oh yeah, with La Vitador, they approached me, and I couldn't do it on my own, so I kind of roped Livy into doing it. And we've been doing it now for I think 2.5 years, or maybe even 3 so far. It's so hard sometimes to come up with something to say, because we're so critical of everything between each other. But we try to keep it light and nice for the public. But yeah, so that's just fun. I mean, we try to use our power wisely and showcase a variety of genres, authors, and imprints, and not focus only on the big thing that is coming out or has come out recently. Because although there's many famous writers that I do love, I mean, Stephen King probably doesn't need
Yes,
another
yes.
column from me. And so I showcase, I think the last one we talked about Word Horde, and some of the work that they've been doing. I think they're a fine little imprint, and they've done a lot of collections. I really love Oren Gray, who's got a collection with them, and some of the other folks that they've been working with. So I try to talk about them in that thing. And it's always sweet because when I talk about small imprints, I sometimes get feedback from the writers that they tell me, "Oh, you had me in the Washington Post, and then I sold 50 books in like one day." And so I'm like, wow, that's just great. You don't get to see the impact of what you do basically normally. You just talk about something, and you're there and you have no idea what's happening. But sometimes people do tell me, I did get a bunch of sales thanks to you. Or somebody might tell me on social media, I had never heard about this book, but I bought it and it was good. When they say it was good, it's great. Please don't tell me if you did. I hate
And
you.
and speaking of books for folks to look forward to, tell us all about The Daughter of Dr. Moreau and what folks can expect when that's coming out.
Yeah, so it's coming out in July. It's my 8th novel, if I'm not mistaken, and it is a reimagining of The Island of Dr. Moreau, the famous short sci-fi novel by H.G. Wells. And this one is a reimagining of it. So it takes some ideas from it and then places them in 19th century Mexico in Yucatan, and builds a story where obviously there is a daughter because she's on the cover of the book. So I call it historical science fiction. I don't consider it a horror novel because I never considered Moreau a horror novel. I considered it science fiction. Some people might want to quibble about me with that, about me, but that's just the way I always saw it. And so it's been quite fun. I hope people like it. I took a detour into noir for my past 2 novels, so this is me returning to fantastic fiction for a little bit.
And are things getting to a place where you can do kind of the regular, you know, publicizing and getting it out there, or are you sort of like, is this going to be another sort of COVID novel and COVID release and things like that?
Yeah, well, Jeff Vandermeer today was saying that he's had 3 novels under COVID, and I that's my story too. It's going to be 3 novels under COVID for me this year too, and a novella, and 2 re-releases. And it's not something that I really wanted. It's not the ideal situation by any means, but it's just the way it is. And right now it looks like I'll be able to do a couple of events. So knock on wood, nothing horrible happens. I was booking tickets for something, and then the war in Ukraine started. And so I was like, oh, that's just, yeah, I'm gonna go to sleep now. kind of situation. It makes it really hard to think about anything when the world is kind of on fire, both psychologically and also because you don't know if um, things are going to be really bad when the place where you were thinking about going, there's a resurgence of the virus. Will I travel outside of Canada? Maybe I can't leave at all. And I have to say no. So, but it's been the reality for me and other writers that this is just the hand you're dealt with, and you just got to do it. You can't lay down and go to sleep forever.
Very true. One last thing I desperately need to ask, because it has come up, is just why are you so afraid of Mothman?
Um, I think because you don't know what Mothman does. It's just that uncanny, right? And it is, I think it's very much weird fiction as opposed to horror feeling in that sense. With vampires, they want to bite you. With werewolves, I guess they also want to bite you, and zombies too. Everybody wants to bite you. But you kind of understand these creatures. They all have mechanics that we have agreed on for the most part. There's a difference between fast zombies and slow zombies, but we all agree that zombies can somehow be killed, generally with a bullet to the head or this taking off the head in some way. Werewolves, most of us agree that silver bullets, and vampires stake through the heart, that kind of thing. So we understand them in a way, but Mothman is not understandable. What does Mothman want? What does Mothman eat? Is Mothman really evil, or is he just, a moth, or is there something more sinister going on around here? So it really goes from that area for me. For me, the scariest thing is like the unknown. It's like Mothman is just like a cipher. So I find him really kind of scary and fascinating. And all the stories that I've read about Mothman have that ambiguity of, is Mothman bad, or is Mothman just like, something that happens to you on a lonesome highway? He's a creepy little thing.
Nice. Love it. Silvia, thank you so much for being on. Where can folks find you? Where can they, if they're interested in social media and whatnot?
I am on Twitter, I am on Goodreads, and I am on Instagram, although I may not look at them all the time. And I have a website, yes, silviamorenogarcia.com. And you can find me there. I'm most active on Twitter. On Instagram, I just kind of put little pretty pictures, and sometimes pictures of flowers, things like that. Innocuous, things. On Twitter, I talk more about publishing, that kind of stuff. And on Goodreads, I do read, and I do talk about books, although I do not star them. I do not believe in stars, but I do sometimes discuss them there. And that's just my philosophy. I think stars are sometimes not so good. They kind of take away some of the joy of discussing something.
Well, thank you so much for being on here. This has been Ask Lovecraft After Dark, the sister program to Ask Lovecraft. Folks can find more interviews with Silvia and others at asklovecraft.com. You can find out what's happening with me at lehmankessler.com, or hear me shouting into the void on Twitter at Lehman Kessler, or dancing before my camera on TikTok at Mayor Lovecraft. Silvia, it's been an absolute blast as always, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you.